Those of you who have joined us online, I would like to welcome you all. We'll just wait a couple more minutes for people to join us. Meanwhile, we would appreciate if you could answer the question on the chat box. So let's begin. Greetings and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Komal Khatri from World Resource Institute India. WRI India is an Indian research to action organization. We work to accelerate India's development, working in nexus of environment, economic opportunity, and human well-being. On behalf of WRI India, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the webinar, session 2 of 3-part transport sector stakeholder consultations. Just a few instructions before we begin. All attendees will remain in listen-only mode. However, please use the questions pane on the panel to your right to post questions during the webinar. We'll try to take up the questions in the discussion session. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all the registered participants. So today we have a esteemed panel of speakers who will discuss about the decarbonization of urban transport in India. Now, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce you to the esteemed speakers and highlight the agenda. We'll start with Dr. Om Prakash Agarwal. Dr. Agarwal is the CEO of WRI India, who will be setting the context for the webinar. Then, Subrata Chakrabarty, a senior manager climate program at WRI India, will be presenting on different urban transport scenarios using EPS tool. Followed by Ms. M. Janki IAS, Director of the Urban Transport and Smart City Mission, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, will be speaking on challenges and opportunities to decarbonize urban transport through integrated transport systems. And then followed by Dr. Prabjot Kaur, co-founder and CEO of Esmito Solutions Private Limited. She'll take us through opportunities to decarbonize urban transport through accelerated adoption of electric vehicles. After that, Professor Shivanand Swamy, Professor and Executive Director, Center for Excellence in Urban Transport at CEPT University, will highlight the opportunities to decarbonize urban transport through interventions in travel demand management and land use. Followed up by Mr. Prasanna Pratwardhan, Chairman and Managing Director, Prasanna Purple Mobility Solutions Private Limited. He will speak on challenges and opportunities to decarbonize the urban transport through the model shift from private to public transport. We'll also hear from Mr. Gerald Olivier, the lead transport specialist with the World Bank in India. He'll be speaking on opportunities to decarbonize urban transport through non-motorized transport options and also touch upon accelerated electric bus adoption. And then we'll have the open discussions, which will be moderated by Ulka Kelkar, Director of the Climate Program at WRI India. After that, we'll conclude the webinar. Now, I would like to invite Dr. O.P. Agarwal from WRI India to set the context and open the webinar. Dr. O.P. Agarwal is the CEO of WRI India. He was the Executive Director at the Indian School of Business and chaired the US Transport Research Board's Committee on Transportation in Developing Countries. He authored India's National Urban Transport Policy, a document that outlines the priorities for sustainable urban transport at all levels of government. Over to you, O.P. sir.
Thanks, Komal. Thank you very much. And on my behalf, on behalf of WRI India, again, welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for giving us this time. Some of you got this notice at very short notice. It was nice of you to have agreed. We really appreciate that. As far as setting the context for a group like this, I don't think I need to set a context. They're all very familiar with this. But nevertheless, let me say a little bit. As you know, India has, very ambitiously decided to mitigate GHG emissions. They are one of the participants to the NDC, the Paris Accord, and they have made their commitments under the NDC. These are very welcome commitments that have been made. And in that, one of the things that is being recognized in a country like India is that the transport sector is amongst the fastest growing. Even if it's not the highest today, it is amongst the fastest growing sectors as far as GHG emissions are concerned. And within that, the urban transport sector is growing the fastest, largely because of the pace of urbanization and the demand for urban transport, the demand for motorized transport systems. That is what has led to urban transport being the fastest growing segment as far as GHG emissions growth is concerned. And that is why this session is focused on what can we do around urban transport. Studies which have been done at the World Bank, Gerald knows about this. They looked at technological options versus demand management options. And what that report really came up with is while technological options give you some leeway or can take you to a certain extent, there are limits to how far technology by itself can help. A lot of the effort will have to be made as far as demand management measures are concerned. And that is where this whole thing about shifting to public transport, shifting to non-motorized transport, these are ways in which perhaps the greater impact can be felt in GHG emissions. So let me leave it with that as far as just setting the context is concerned, and I'll leave it to the panelists to really talk in terms of their expertise and the areas that they are most well equipped to talk about. Thank you very much once again to all of you. I'll pass it back to Komal for the next speaker.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Agarwal, for setting the context right and opening the webinar. Now we'll have a brief presentation by Subrata Chakrabarty. He's the Senior Manager with the Climate Program at WRI India. He's involved in various research work based on the thematic areas of informing the next round of NDCs, long-term strategies, and electric mobility. Over to you, Subrata.
Thanks, Komal. Please do let me know if you can see my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is.
Right. Thank you so much, Komal. And it is, a real pleasure to be a part of such a distinguished and esteemed panel. Let me start with a few numbers. So India has the second largest road network, which is likely to increase because of government's recent announcement of constructing road worth of $212 billion US in next 2 years. We have roughly 253 million vehicles as on 2017. Motorization rate has also increased, and we have roughly 161 vehicles per 1,000 people, which is an increase of 123% as compared to 2005 number. India has also witnessed a CAGR of 10% between 2007 and 2017 as far as the vehicle growth is concerned. Passenger movement stands at 3,189 billion passenger kilometer, which is roughly 267% increase from 2005 level. And consequently, the greenhouse gas emissions from the transport sector has doubled within the time frame of 2005 to 2015. GHG Platform India dataset reveals that the road transport nearly contributes to somewhere around 87% of the transport-related emissions in 2015. So, if you see the slide, the team here at WRI India has analyzed the comprehensive mobility plans for 27 cities. And considering the fact that now, urban sprawls have led to longer lengths and improvement in standard of living has also given rise to public vehicles. Despite that, what we observed is cycling and walking trips constitute a large percentage of total trips made in India. So almost 50% in 50%. And having said that, there are still issues related to infrastructure development for non-motorized transport, related to safety and design issues, and last but not the least, of course, the finance. Again, the slide that you are seeing right now, it's again based on the compilation from Comprehensive Mobility Plan for 20 cities. As you can see, many cities have plans to adopt different strategies. However, some of these strategies are not accompanied with clean and clear implementation and monitoring plan. There are limited information on strategies like adoption of parking policies, which are really conducive for promotion of urban transport. So one clear message that is emerging from this slide is Indian cities can use more policy measures to reduce emissions. This graph that is evident in this slide is basically developed using Energy Policy Simulator. It's a free and open source system dynamic model that helps in designing policy packages and visualize the impact on emissions and health and electricity demand, travel demand, a lot of outputs. It is prudent to note here that EPS is not a forecasting tool, it is not a projection tool, but it provides the user with what if analysis. When one or more than one policies are combined, what will be the impact on some of the outputs like emissions and health. And the figure highlights the growth in air pollution when we do not act or implement on policies that are non-polluting in nature. You can also see a dip in the emissions corresponding to 2020. Whereas we have been admiring the clear skies and we have been watching a lot of videos of nature reclaiming the urban space, we should also be mindful of the fact that 14 out of 20 world's worst polluted cities are still in India. And if we do not act on creating additional policies which are low carbon in nature, this fact is going to remain intact. So COVID-19 should not be taken as a proxy for improvement in the climate and air pollution, because when economy will kick back, the emissions is going to rise. Similarly, for the CO2 emissions from the transport sector, you can see that the transport related CO2 emission is likely to increase by more than 200% at the end of 2040 if low carbon pathways are not adopted. So on the basis of EPS policy and EPS tool, we have designed a couple of policy packages just to give you the flavor of what will happen when we mix a couple of policies together. What we have done is we have also adjusted the GDP due to the recession caused by COVID-19 for all the scenarios that is visible in the slide. And India's GDP has contracted by 23.9% in April-June quarter, but a recent report released by State Bank of India says that the real GDP contraction will happen to the tune of 10.9% for the financial year 21. So we have created three scenarios. The first scenario comprises of clean transport scenario, where we have considered the conventional pollution standard. India has adopted stringent Bharat Stage 6 emission norms, which has 60% reduction in 63% reduction in particulate matter discharge as compared to Bharat Stage 1 level, and hence the same has been considered for this particular analysis. We have also considered light duty vehicles, heavy duty vehicles, as well as motorbikes. For the electric vehicles sales mandate, we have considered a percentage of 30% of new vehicles by 2030. And here also we have only considered the LDVs, HDVs, and the motorbikes. India has also adopted a target of 20% ethanol blending in petrol by 2030 under National Biofuel Policy 2018. So same has also been considered under the low carbon fuel standard. The second scenario basically adds all the policy packages that are mentioned in the clean transport scenario, along with the hydrogen vehicle sales mandate. So India doesn't really have a hydrogen vehicle sales mandate as yet, but we have assumed a 30% new vehicle sales to be hydrogen vehicle by 2030. Lastly, we have considered the clean power scenario, which basically comprises of the policy packages in clean transport scenario and hydrogen vehicle scenario. But apart from that, we have also considered the carbon-free electricity standard, and we assume that the percentage of minimum amount of electricity generation from carbon-free sources will be 31% by 2030, making it in line with the Central Electricity Authority's optimal generation capacity mix report. We have also considered the early retirement of old coal-based power plants. Earlier this year, Union Budget 2020 proposes closing down of thermal power plants, which are old and have high carbon emissions. So we have considered a retirement rate of 7,000 megawatt per year to retire pre-existing coal capacity of 191 gigawatt by 2033. So based on that, what we have understood is if we adopt the policy packages that are mentioned in the clean transport scenario, we can save 14 billion lives by the end of 2040. But again, when we couple it with the clean power scenario policy packages, then we can save up to 62 billion lives by the end of 2040. Similar is the case with emissions. Similar is the case with the emissions. So with strong policies in the transport sector, when coupled with the clean transport scenario policy packages, can reduce up to 6% of CO2 emissions by 2040. So with this background, let me pose a couple of key discussion points that we are going to hear from our distinguished panelists. What are the challenges in terms of technological, behavioral, economical, and social, and opportunities specific to India regarding mass electrification of urban transport? What specific smart infrastructure tailored to Indian cities would facilitate the integration of different transport modes in cities? What kind of coordinated policy and planning, as well as organizational and institutional changes that is required to enable the mass electrification of urban transport? From the government perspective, what is required to enable such transitions? And lastly, what are the options that we can include for electrifying the urban transport targets and mention them in the India's NDC? I'll end here. Thank you so much for patience listening. Over to you, Komal. Thank you.
Thank you, Subrata. Thank you for an insightful presentation. And let me now invite Ms. M. Janki IAS, the Director of the Urban Transport and Smart City Mission. She's the Deputy Secretary in the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India. She closely monitored the implementation of a number of projects under the Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Mission and the Rajiv Awas Yojana pilot project. Over to you, ma'am. I'll just make you the presenter.
Yeah, thanks, Komal. Good afternoon, everyone. I thank O.P. Agarwal sir for giving me this opportunity to be there in the webinar. It's really a good and nice comeback for me. Thank you, sir. And thanks to Komal and Subrata for facilitating my presentation here. So let me straight away start my presentation. Just tell me if you can see my screen.
Yes, it's visible now.
Yeah. Just a second. Yeah. So we are talking about decarbonizing urban transport in today's webinar. Just to touch upon the basics of the economic theory around transportation. So as we see here, it's a cycle. So what is transportation, what is mobility is all about? It's about providing accessibility to people to their places of work, either office or education or place of entertainment. It facilitates movements of goods and services. So once within a city, this accessibility is being provided and it's being supplied, then you see the development happening in the city as well. The city lifeline is a transportation. So the city development happens with the increased activities in industrial and commercial areas. The people income rise, and with the rise in income of people, just a second, I lost my, yeah. So with the rise in income of the people, so what do we see? Lot of people come on roads for accessibility. They have to move out. So the trip rates increases. And with the trip rate increase, there is increase in motorization. The mode share also changes. And then associated with that is the impact that it creates on the environment. We have a lot of pollution, congestion, accidents happening, and then the degradation not just in natural resources but a lot of human resources also need, the cost has to be associated with this. And these negative externalities again impact the transportation. So it's a cycle. So then it affects, when you have so much of negative externalities, it affects at the end of the day, again, the provision of transportation to the people who want to access their places of work. So it's a cycle. But once we understand that transportation is the lifeline for the development of a city, for the development of the citizens, then it's important that we also look at how things have changed over the time. And Subrata has already shown the big numbers. So it's just the same, just in the comparison, maybe the base years might be different. As we see the rate of growth in the population versus the rate of growth in the vehicle, we see a huge difference. And also, even in the vehicle growth rate, we see what kind of vehicles have increased over the years. The public transportation vehicles, the buses, have not increased much, vis-a-vis the growth in personal vehicles like cars and two-wheelers. Also, grave is a situation that there is the decline of public transportation. These are the numbers that we again picked up from the CDPs of certain cities. The base years again differ by 1 or 2 years, but overall the message is that definitely there is a concern in all the cities about decline of public transport, in spite of the situations that a lot of money has been put into in improving the infrastructure and provision of different kind of mass transit services and all that, because the provision of services, I think, has not matched with the growth in the trip rate that has happened. So what are we looking at? Accessibility is what has to be provided forever. So while giving the accessibility, we have to maintain the capability to provide the accessibility over time for the city to grow, for the people to improve their livelihoods. While we expand the accessibility of people, while we give the mobility to people, there is also the scarcity of resources which is coming in. As I said, not just the natural resources. So there has to be a fine balance, and the sustainable mobility comes there. because we cannot equitably expand accessibility for infinitely. We have been doing all these years before. We have been building flyovers, expanding roads. So were they equitable enough? And are they finite? Have they provided solution to the ever increasing demand for travel? They are definitely not. So I have just pointed out the major areas where we could intervene, because transportation, as I said, is the lifeline of the city, and it cuts across many sectors. When we look at the supply side, there is definitely scope for a lot of improvement to on the public provision of public transport services, whether it is city bus services or the mass transit systems or the NMT services. And from the demand side, the travel demand management measures can be taken up. And when we have the demand management measures and the provision of public transport services through the public authorities or the private companies, then there is a need to integrate these systems. And for this integration to happen, we need to have the certain systems in place, whether it's institutional systems or financial systems or the capacity requirements. So I'm happy that while we talk about the decarbonizing urban transport, we are just not restricting ourselves to the EV in this webinar, that we are covering a wide range of topics, which is very, very important. And today I'm just touching upon the integration of transportation systems. We have to understand a trip made by one customer or one traveler who's our client is not just a single an isolated event. It's a chain of trips. It's number of modes are involved when he travels from place A to B and then back from B to A. So any weak link in this system then disrupts his access, and it creates unpleasant experience for the traveler. And it's unfortunate that we haven't properly defined and identified a lot of these segments. So it's very important that for an effective transportation system to function, the trip chain has to be seamless, so that people use multimodal system and then they have a better experience. Especially in the current scenario where we have the disruptive services in places, and which is, I mean, taking over all our attention with the kind of service it provides to the people, it is much more important that we talk about integration. So what are the pillars of integration? I've just tried to capture 5 areas, and the first and prominent one is the institutional integration, which is also, I feel that it's a bit challenging and difficult. Nevertheless, it's the very most important, because the integration is possible from the planning stage, and it will be effective only if we start from the planning stage. So we have different levels of services being provided, starting from the planning and policy formulation stages. Then we have infrastructure planning, service planning, enforcement and regulatory functions. And at the lower level, we have the mundane public transport operations, construction and maintenance of infrastructure and common services. So there are different authorities involved at different levels. And as long as they play in silos, the integration becomes difficult. Though we are trying to, over the years have improved and have provided a lot of, different modes. But unless we have a unified authority in place, then everything is operating in silos. So this is very, very important. UMTA has been proposed since long, Unified Metropolitan Transit Authorities. But at the state level, state can also innovate and work on which works for them, between them and the cities. This is very, very important. We have also seen examples from outside the country, and also for us also, while we work with the states, we have found how like while dealing with Karnataka, having DULT, the Directorate of Urban Land Transport, it was very easy to, have that communication, and for the planning also, when there is a unified authority, though it doesn't qualify itself as a UNTA, but it takes care of a lot of things at this, whatever are the aspects to be taken at the city level and the state level. Then we have the operational integrations. This is the integration of the soft infrastructure aspects, where the different modes have to complement each other. So within a mode, we have to look at the rationalization of the services being provided. The redundant services have to be removed, and we have to match the modes with the service requirements. It's about developing, scheduling of feeder routes and things like that. So this is very important in providing the seamless travel experience to any commuter, because if a commuter is made to wait 2-3 times more than his travel time, then the efficiency suffers. Then we have the physical integration of transport systems, where we talk about the integration of the hard infrastructure services between the different modes. We have to focus on the intermodal terminals, multimodal hubs, the transit shelters, and then parking facilities, all the services. And think of a situation where we use the first mile access to access the stations, the last mile connectivities. And then now that we have the shared services, separate services, we can use them to complement in the bus routes where it is not productive for a mass transit. And also we can focus on the main peak corridors with the mass dense network of the mass transit systems. And then comes the fare integration, which is the ideal situation where we could wish for, where there is unification of fare structures, one journey, one ticket principle. So, and then the information integration. Information in this stage is very key in the providing seamless travel to the commuters, in providing a nice experience to the commuter. It includes everything, including the route maps, timetables, their schedules, everything. And as part of this, I thought I would touch about mobility as a service concept also. It is just a concept, but it brings into everything what we talk about integration. It needs a stage where our the systems, or the infrastructure systems and the soft infrastructure systems are have reached a mature stage, are at certain level, then we can bring everyone together. In this concept, we don't talk about owning a vehicle, but we look at mobility just as a service. Irrespective of what mode a commuter travel, it's a service that we provide, which has to be seamless and which the commuter enjoys. So the commuter purchases the trip than the vehicle or whatever mode of transport. Pure information is the key. There are a lot of inherent challenges when we reach to this stage, because the main challenge I see is, apart from the technology which has to evolve and mature, bringing in all the transport authorities, transport operators, the solution providers, the OEMs, and then weaving all of them together into this chain which I was talking about is a major challenge. But this is what we are looking ahead in, and the direction in which we have to move. And at the government level, when we have different players in the field, government can look at these levers to promote the integration of systems in terms of operations, in terms of price controls, and in terms of supply regulation. Even the disruptive services we are seeing in the market, how it has disrupted and how the regulations which are not in place are sometimes not conducive to even the commuters. So these are the areas which, when we look at the integration of the transportation systems, that the policy level levers have to be provided from the government side. So what are we looking at the desired outcomes? Through the integration of the transportation systems, we desire that the passengers at the end of the day get a better service, and the whole transportation system works so efficiently, seamlessly, such that the negative externalities and other effects come down. And even for the operators, whether public or private, it becomes financially viable. So this is what we are looking at as the desired outcome of the integrated transportation systems. And this is what I just wanted to touch upon for today. And at the end, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Janki ma'am, for an insightful presentation. It was wonderful to hear your perspective. And please, audience, keep engaging. You can share your questions, comments in the questions panel to your right. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Prabjot Kaur, the co-founder and CEO of Esmito Solutions Private Limited, India's first indigenously developed platform for real-time smart management of EV infrastructure. Her primary research focus includes charging infrastructure, batteries, and management systems, and R&D to commercialization. She'll take us through opportunities to decarbonize urban transport through accelerated adoption of electric vehicles. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Komal. Thank you so much. Thank you, O.P. sir, and thank you, WRI team, for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here and talking on this occasion. I'll mostly try to speak and share my views on the whole issue of decarbonization and the urban mobility together. We have been discussing and talking on the whole picture of it and the ecosystem around that. What do we need to create, and what are all the different segments that we have, and how to cater into all different segments to bring in a very meaningful and probably a good growth that we can see for electric vehicles in place for the urban as well as rural. But now, since we are focusing more on rural, we all know that as far as India is concerned, we see that and talk about that India is the fourth largest automobile manufacturer in the world, and probably the largest one in two-wheelers and four-wheelers. And on the other side, we also know that 12, 14 out of 20 most polluted cities in the world have come from India. And besides that, when we talk about premature deaths happening due to pollution, there we are at the top in the world. So combine both of these together, I would say that it is no longer a luxury or no longer a want that we are seeing or wanting that EVs should happen or EVs should come in the country, looking at imports and all other things. But at this point in time, it is actually the need, and it has become the necessity, and we have to go towards that direction. So once that now every one of us knows that that is the direction to move to, how do we move ahead with that? So the basic thing is we need to create that ecosystem. We need to have promotion to create that ecosystem happening. And at the same time, we want that everything should happen in an indigenous manner. The imports should reduce. We should promote the employability and the employments in the country as such. We should have our own technology. To do this whole as an ecosystem, there are two key actors that play a very, very important role. And the very first thing when it comes to an actor in promoting an ecosystem, we're all wanting that government should do something. Sarkar kuch to karegi, right? So when we talk about that, so here we say that it is either the central government and the state government, and they have been doing. We have seen in the recent year that there are a number of steps that they have taken at the central government level, at NITI Aayog, at DHI level, when we talk about policies and the frame that had come in 2015 for 2 years, and 17, sorry, and in 2019 when we see a good amount of subsidies that they have promised, something like 10,000 crores, it's not a small amount. And when we see for a promotion, something like 10 lakhs two-wheelers, 5 lakhs three-wheelers, recently kind of a commitment for 5,000 buses in 64 cities, and recent introduction on the EV policies by the state government like Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Delhi. These are all very encouraging as far as we see that the government is playing in this whole promotion. Now, overall, sorry, somebody's talking.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so overall, when we see for the government incentives and the plans, we say that these could be direct incentives or they could be indirect incentives. So direct incentives, for example, for manufacturing setup, we see a lot of policies promote land rules relaxations, they promote road tax exemptions, though we also see that maybe there's not much uniformity as far as we see at the state government level, which is probably an obvious thing to say. But in a couple of states, we say that no road tax, so it's complete exemption. In Kerala, we say something like 5%, and in Tamil Nadu, we see something like 7.5%. So at different state level, there are different promotions in a way that people are doing, and there are special electricity tariffs being introduced. And on the other side, when we talk about indirect incentives like green number plate or maybe specialized parking or specialized lane, which probably is a little difficult for India to adopt, but yeah, number of things that have been introduced. The bond that we may have from the government was maybe on the GST, lower GST on subsystem level to the final executed product that we are going to sell. So if we see currently, we have 5% or let's say to generalize it, maybe lower GST on the product that we sell as a charger or as EV. But if we talk about the subsystems, the GST is still 18%. So there is kind of a uncorrelated GST that you have to account in your costing while we sell the final product. The second is on the implementation clarity, because most of the times that the policies come, it is the implementation clarity comes at a very later stage, and we also see that there is a gap between one ministry to another ministry and passing on those incentives to finally to the customer, to the client. To say for an example, we recently had this announcement that the vehicle could be sold without the battery, right? Now, the vehicle could be sold without battery, wherein people are talking and we're very happy that, yeah, it can be done. But can the vehicle be homologated without the battery? We do not know. Can an OEM sell the vehicle without homologation if it is vehicle was not a part of the battery? We do not know. Would the battery considered as a complete homologated one can be sold to a customer directly? We do not know. And what would happen to the subsidy if that is sold without the battery? We do not know. And how to channelize all that, and who would be passing on all those incentives once this happens? So all these, I think, yes, it takes time, but once the policy comes, how much time and what would be the steps and how much clarity we can attain is something that we can probably say that this is an ask from the government that we can put through. But I also see that lots of efforts that both at the central and the state level governments are putting in, especially in some of the when we talk about some of the state governments here. Now, the second part of it that we talk about, apart from what governments should do, is the people, or I would put it in a context that it is basically the market. So how would the market drive EV adoption, and how can that be done maybe faster? So to see that, the first thing is that how to make the market forecast meet the actual reality or the production that can happen in the country. So in whatever segment we talk about, two-wheelers or three-wheelers, we talk of public transportation that are there. What is the demand and how much is it that we are producing, or how much is it that we can produce? And is there a good mapping that is done are we seeing that yes, the number of manufacturers that are coming up in all different subdomains are feeding to the right direction or the right mapping as far as the forecasts go? So if we look at the entire domain, the infrastructure that we need to create to promote faster adoptability of the electric vehicles, two ways to look at that. One, that we can define it as far as a mode of transportation are concerned, or the segments that we have to look into. So in this segment, I usually say it's three. So it's public transportation, it's logistics and deliveries, and the third is the personal communication. So as far as personal communication is concerned on the EVs, we have seen the trends, and mostly that is something that is going to happen in India as well, that most of the EV owners are going to charge their vehicles at their homes. So basically it's a home charging that is going to happen, which is probably 90 to 95% of the time. And maybe the rest of the 5% of the time, they'll be largely dependent upon the offices or the parking spaces that they have outside of their homes for charging, where they usually visit. So it is not that where they rarely visit, they are going to charge their vehicles. So that is one kind of a category. Second is when we talk of public transportation across all the segments. Now, these could be largely buses, or when we talk about three-wheelers, and certainly now the two-wheelers that the companies have also started to launch, like e-share, bike shares, etc. also. But in all these, the whole of this segment that largely fall under public infrastructure. Here, the infrastructure that would be largely needed would be a mix of charging as well as swapping infrastructure. And especially when we come to the third category, that is the delivery logistics, the infrastructure that we would require would be largely that we can think of is about swapping infrastructure, because here people would not want to wait more for charging their vehicles, and they do not want a downtime to their deliveries, downtime to their commercial or the business applications. So that way swapping would also become a very important role to play as far as the infrastructure is concerned. And then finally, the density of the whole distribution of the vehicles that you need to see in one area versus the other area, and how do we actually cater to that, and can we really have the way we are talking about that, put up the public chargers on the petrol stations, can we really go there and stand there for half an hour, 45 minutes? May not be that feasible, because not only for client point perspective that I would have the time to go there and park my vehicle there, but also if we look at the petrol stations, where their turnaround time is about 2 to 3 minutes per car. So you can't expect that we'll go there and block the ways out. So probably to have the faster promotion, we'll have to think about a different strategy in place, that for different category of vehicles, for different segments, how to have a good creation or a push of the infrastructure that would be needed. That's the second part of it to the market. The third side of it is when we talk about the challenges that we have to look at. And as we talk about the challenges, there become the opportunities as well. So two sides again, one on the technology side of it, and the second on the market side of it. Now, let's first talk on the technology part of it. When we talk about the technology part of it, we rarely see anything getting produced in India right now. So almost 90% of whatever we see on the electric vehicles are getting imported from mostly China. So be it batteries, motors, controllers, converters, chargers. So all these subsystems we need to produce in-house. Now, there could be some things that we could say that these are the low-hanging fruits that one can try to capture first. For example, if we talk about batteries, we know that we do not have a very mature technology for producing the cells in the country, unless some JVs happen or something else happens and a proven product comes out of the country. But right now we do not have, and maybe that's a long hanging fruit. So the lower one, where we also see that almost 50-60 companies have already emerged up in making cells to pack. So it's a battery manufacturing facility or battery assembly plant that you need, one may have. But yeah, to begin with, that is a good value to add in the whole ecosystem. Second is the motor and controllers. We see a lot of it that is getting produced in India in terms of induction motors. But when it comes to the electric motors, we do not see much or anyone who's producing it right away. And DC motors like VLDC motor, PMSM motor, a number of those things have to be quickly picked up, and we need to start producing them in the country. And we also see that there are a number of R&D houses where the products are almost ready, and we are seeing that the tech transfers are now rapidly happening. So that's some good news that we have, that people are now very, very interested to move into the electric vehicles and their subsystems, where we were earlier not talking about that we need to have the technology also in-house, but we were largely seeing that we can actually have the imported things, make an EV here and start selling that. But now we see that a lot of interest that in the technology that we have, and that's certainly on the controllers and chargers as well. And if we see for other systems, like we talk about autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles, so that is where we would say that we are not much behind the rest of the world. So if we talk about EVs in general, we say that from technology point of view, we are probably a decade behind because they started much earlier, and the subsystems are quite matured, are very much tuned to their own environment. And yes, we have to do it ourselves, and their system may not work here, and we need to have our own systems and that readiness here. So we have to gear up, we have to be moving very fast onto the basic systems and the basic development side of it. And that's certainly not rocket science, but we need to have dedicated effort put into that. But when you talk about very advanced technologies, where we see that probably the rest of the world is also at an experimental stage, that is where some of our very renowned companies or some startups can join hand together and do some kind of innovation and launch it for the world, not only for the country, but launch it for the world, especially for urban transportation, where we talk about connected systems, autonomous system, wireless charging, dynamic charging. And another very important perspective that comes and falls in place is a balance. How do we create a balance between generation of electricity, consumption of electricity, transmission of electricity, and finally also storage? So how do we bring the whole of this in sync with each other, that there is a bell-to-wheel kind of the whole perspective considered, to see that it is not only that you have to generate electricity to charge the vehicles, but how to generate that effectively, how to store that effectively, how do we have communication between the vehicle and the grid, and that makes a good holistic sense out of the complete end-to-end chain. And finally, when we talk about the second part of it, that is the innovations in the business use cases. As much as the technology plays a role, the same importance is also for the business innovations and the use cases that a good entrepreneur or set of organizations can come up with. So be it mobility as a service, like Ms. Janki just presented, or I would say transport as a service, energy as a service. So all these things coming up as service rather than selling the products as such, and combined together with the multimodal transportation, etc. So if we see here, we see that there are a lot of challenges that need to be addressed, both on the business side of point of view, since this is a very nascent market, on the technology front also. And as much are the challenges both on the government level and the state level, and the technology side, on the business side, and also for the public to adopt all those changes, because you see, after all, we are seeing a transition after a very, very long time. So we have been using ICE vehicles, and we have been in this ICE age of transportation for about a century. So now it is a shift. So this shift is very interesting, and we are there into this journey, seeing that this is happening. So with these all challenges, there are huge opportunities in front of us, and which each of us can explore and maybe win in our respective areas. And with this, I would like to end, and I wish everyone a great transition journey ahead. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prabjot, for your interesting points and highlighting how EV transport can increase its share in transport sector. Thank you so much, ma'am. Now I would like to invite Professor Shivanand Swamy, Executive Director, Center for Excellence in Urban Transport at CEPT University. He's an economist and an urban and regional planner with extensive experience in transport systems, integrated land use transport planning, and development management. We will look forward to hearing from him on opportunities to decarbonize urban transport through interventions in travel demand management and land use. Over to you, sir.
Please give me, how do I upload my presentation?
Yes, sir. Just a second.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir. Your screen is visible.
Good afternoon. Thank you, O.P. Thank you, madam. I think it's after a long time that we are meeting, and it's also a nice way of meeting, without carbonizing. In fact, we are decarbonizing while we are organizing all this activity. What I would like to do as part of this topic, opportunities to decarbonize urban transport through interventions in travel demand management, I'd like to bring in some important aspects, what I think are important, based on our work in different cities. Yeah, the first important thing which I'd like to highlight is it's not just one thing, just electrification will decarbonize. I think that's probably not a right thing to consider. When you have multiple things acting together, adopted as part of a one large integrated system, there is going to be a synergy pathway there. A few years back, we did some exercise. One is, of course, an impact of vehicle technology, including electric, or whether you go in for Bharat stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think that's an incremental kind of thing there. When you add public transport, the percentage of reduction in the whatever is the share GHG emissions actually increases. And then if we add land use related considerations, there is going to be a synergy effect. Whatever is the reduction which you see there, in that reduction, technology of course takes away a large percentage, almost 46%. And then the public transport promotion takes away another 24%. And then another 22% is because of density or the land use related measures there. But then what is also important is that there are about 7% is a synergy of it, because you are putting 1, 2, and 3 together, and therefore you have a greater benefit than what otherwise you would achieve. Therefore, we need to look at integrated strategies towards decarbonizing. And the opportunities, this was done a few years back. And then when you look at different scenarios there for a city, we did come across, when we adopt all three together in a more aggressive kind of a scenario, it is possible to maintain GHG emissions to the current level despite the growth in population and so on and so forth. I think that is the an optimistic kind of an scenario which gets emerged. How we can achieve it, how far we can achieve it, is a question which we will have to think about. When you say demand management, essentially shifting mobility towards more sustainable way, and that would mean bicycling. That would mean using collective mobility systems, whether it is micro mobility or the bus or the metro, the public transport, or even telecommuting, and many of such aspects. Yeah? There are both push and the pull part of it. In this country, like one of the push factor has always been recognized, that is from Singapore, which did two important things. One, they have a congestion charging on certain streets. I think that's an important part of it. The second one is also buying a car is not easy there, and it's almost costs double the amount of the car price itself, the permits part of it. And therefore, the push, we have always talked about the push, but we have rarely done anything which we might call as a push factor. I think that is one limitation which I'd like to highlight here. We talk about parking policies in our cities, but then ultimately we end up providing parking and not really managing parking. I think that's a limitation which we should keep in mind while we move forward. With regard to pull, there are a lot of questions in terms of, are we doing right things in the right manner? I think let me try and go through a few of those things there. The most important TDM, actually you really want to talk about TDM management tool. The COVID has been the biggest TDM, travel demand management tool in many ways. Instantly, people have started adopting flexi work timings. They have adopted work from home. There are a lot of people who have substituted troops. They just, new technologies are being adopted in every aspect of life. Digital payments are becoming almost all payments are becoming digital. People, online deliveries are happening. Cycling is emerging as a choice in many cities. While all of these impacts, pollution of course has come down, but all of these impacts are visible. Public transport is almost zero today. Now, how do we bring this public transport back on course? I think that is going to be a biggest question post-COVID. All of us will have to, especially the policymakers, would have to think about and really work on that. Really important thing, if we have to address, I think, sorry. Can you see my screen? I have some.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
It's visible. How do I make it visible for me?
Sir, are you able to see the videos right now?
Yes.
So you just have to switch the mode. There will be a small slide shown below the videos.
How do I see my? Okay. Sorry. No, I want to show my presentation. It went off. Okay. Okay, now, no, but I can't see my screen, no. Sorry about this.
So I think try minimizing the webinar window screen. Maybe it might be visible.
Yes, ma'am. एक मिनट इधर कैसे मिनिमाइज करते हैं?
Professor, you can try alter tab.
Alter?
Tab.
Tab.
Yeah.
You are right. Yes, thank you. Yeah. What is important is that this COVID-19 people have changed their mobility habits. I think a lot of people are working, and there are a lot of gains in terms of positive behavior. How you can keep that positive behavior continuing post-COVID. I think that's going to be an important aspect which we all need to work on, I would think. Yeah. And then we also need to reset our priorities and standards as far as public transport and other transport is concerned. Most of what we call public transport system, the way they operate, they're at a very, very basic level, and they are what you might call often jugaads, and then without any quality, reliability, service standards. I think we need to change that part very, very significantly, including the quantity and the quality part of it. We need to develop robust digital infrastructure. I think that's something which has to happen. It has happened, but then I think you need to spread it to a different level. We need to bring cities closer and people closer. There are two aspects to it. Cities closer. Today we are building national highways at a very rapid pace. Probably rather than building highways, maybe we need to build railways for the simple reason that the sustainability, both energy perspective as well as the capacity perspective in the long run, I think railways is always a preferred mode. How do we connect? Unfortunately, rail is a national subject. Railway has become central subject, and then the roadways, both national and the state, build roads there, and therefore we continue to build roads. We rarely see any state actually having a state rail development plan. Gujarat has started one. I think that's the kind of a thing so that you can connect cities a much easier way, much sustainable way. I think that's one part which I'd like to highlight here. The second, in the city itself, you need to bring people closer. That would mean TOD option as well as bus integrated collective mobility. We keep talking about integrated mobility, but then I think bus has to play a very central role there. I think therefore, how do we bring things around the bus is going to be important. Funding and the building capacity are two other areas where we need to look at it. I think the figures bring in a very clear meaning that we need to have walkable streets. You could have NMV focus and also the bus focus, and that has to be explicitly stated. We did a small study some time back. Improving a bus itself in a very simple way actually is not going to bring any benefit in terms of ridership improvements. From what we have, we could only increase it by about 2 to 3%, improved bus service itself. When you introduce a new transit mode, things like BRT or an LRT, it would go up to 32% increase in terms of the ridership shifts there. Yeah, but then if we add fiscal tools, if you apply, then it can go up to about 75% mode shifts from 2 and 4-wheeler side there. Yeah, and therefore the key is, if you really want to achieve mode shifts in favor of sustainable modes, only way is, or one of the important way is to add costs there. Without fiscal disincentives, people are less likely to shift. Quality public transport and other collective modes are important, but at the same time, making private transport expensive and difficult to use, I think we need to do that. And whatever we do, about 25%, we'll still continue to use private mode. We have to accept that fact. I think that's probably fair enough. Yeah. Now going forward, now very quickly I'll run through a few messages which I have. One is we need to invest in the right sub-sectors there. We should not do too much of symbolic or status providing investments. We need to look at the meaningful contribution which our investments are making. Value for money has to be the key there. Yeah, when you choose that, we are building metro systems in many cities. They may be required, but whether they are required today in the right quantity, are we building them? There are a lot of questions which are there. Yeah, very quickly we looked at some ridership versus the forecast. Everywhere, world over, actually, metros invariably fall short in terms of the demand, fall short in terms of what was forecasted by 70–80%. That's an important thing there. What about our metros, except Delhi Metro? Most metros and Hyderabad Metro now actually have hardly any ridership on their systems. But then we continue to build ridership. We continue to build metros. I think that's one cause for worry. We're investing so much money. What are we getting out of it? Is this the right time to invest in the metro systems there? Very often, why forecasts fail is because optimism in terms of the mode shift is significant. People expect that the people will shift to public transport, and especially the metro. It doesn't happen in most cases there. We also looked at many other cities and then many other modes, including public transport, BRT and LRT. What we found is that people who shift to new public transit or rapid transit modes were invariably using either bus or a bus-like or a public transport-like service. Let's take a paratransit of some sort, the informal public transport systems all over the world. If this is what it is, I think now it very clearly says the focus has to be on our primary, the central public transport system, that's the bus. How we make bus better, I think, is the question which we need to address. And then access, again, access to public transport do not come from private modes. Access to public transport comes from walking or some other form of formal, informal public transport. And therefore, the collective mobility system integration we need to think about, we need to focus on. Bogota, I think, yeah, it also gives a very interesting kind of thing. 60 to 62% is what Bogota had as bus share, public transport share in terms of the overall share. Over the years, if you really look at it, with introduction of the Transmilano, what has happened? Overall share has remained more or less same, and therefore 62% of the bus share shifted some part of it to BRT and some part remained on the bus. But what was provided was a quality bus, a quality public transport. And therefore, you can keep more people on board the bus, provided you also improve the quality of public transport. Otherwise, even those people who are on public transport will move away, I think, from the system. Delhi Metro, we have seen what it is. There are a lot of questions about its viability in the initial stage. Today, we have crossed about 300 kilometers. What is interesting is that the total number of passengers per kilometer, we have about 15,000 kilometers, and that 15,000 kilometer mark we have achieved only in 2019, yeah, with almost like 250 kilometers of operations there. Therefore, I think this gives you a very clear picture in terms of PHPDT, which is a decision criteria in most cases for building metro. If you look at the building metro there, Delhi achieved its PHPDT of 50,000 and 40,000 actually only when it reached 120 kilometers network. In how many cities, how quickly will we be able to build such large network? I think it's something which, again, a policy question for us to look at. Yeah. Now, the next important thing, it's not so much about funding part of it. There's a lot of focus which we are giving on public bike sharing systems there. We have had, as all of us as kids, I'm sure many of you have learned bicycle ride, okay, taking it on rent, whether it's 5 paisa or 10 paisa per hour. And today, we have created a bike sharing system, copied from the West, wherever it is, okay? And each bike costs about 40–50,000 rupees. And then what does it contribute in terms of number of riders? There are examples there. Globally, except for China, nowhere in the world that is bike sharing systems, except for China, seems to have a major significant impact. We are trying to copy it, and there's so much focus in so many cities. Do you really need to focus on this, or we have to do something else? And bicycles are important, but this bike sharing, is it a mode which we would like to encourage, or we need to do something else? Is a question. I will place it here. We can think about it as we go along. Then somehow, for some reason or the other, successes, especially from the low-cost solutions, we don't want to celebrate. I do not know why. One success which was celebrated, the BRT Ahmedabad, it was celebrated significantly, but then we seems to have forgotten later on successes in the bus mode. Today, Surat has the BRT. It also has a regular bus system. It is physical and fare integration between BRT as well as the city buses. With one ticket, a passenger can go from any bus station to any other bus station, changing buses between city buses and BRT, and vice versa. This is a fully integrated, both physical as well as a fare. This we do not talk about for some reason. One wonders why. I think this Surat did not have public transport. They introduced it about 4 or 5 years ago. Now it is working very well. Of course, it is also affected by the COVID. Therefore, why can't we think of integrated low-cost solutions rather than building high-cost solutions? That we need to look at that. This is how it looks like. Yep. Hubli Dharwad, probably one of the best public transport system in the country today for its size class. It's just about 1 million population. It has the best possible infrastructure and integrated system, again designed. A BRT, 22 kilometers BRT, carries about 1 lakh passengers. Many of our metro systems do not carry that kind of system. Why is it that we are not celebrating this success? We are not trying to emulate this success. I think it's a question we need to ask. Yep. And this is BRT Hubli Dharwad. And then we need to also look at incentivizing. We need to look at pricing, institution building. All of these have to be in the right perspective. We have been incentivizing electric bus there. Okay. In fact, if you really look at the cost of electric bus with 80 rupees diesel price, okay, there is no difference in terms of total operating and capital cost. If you really look at the total cost of ownership approach there, it's about 75 kilometers there. And with incentive, in fact, it is much cheaper to run electric buses than any other fuel buses, CNG or even diesel. Why is it that cities are not going in for more and more electric buses there? I think it's a big question. Although technology is evolving, there are a lot of other ecosystem related problems and implementation related problems. I think Prabhajit has very rightly highlighted many of those factors. But then another point which I would like to highlight is how many cities actually want to develop public transport? Who is interested in public transport? Does city have a very clear plan as to build public transport in their cities, bus-based public transport? I think that is the question we need to ask. Just incentives for purchase of buses may not be adequate. There is to be more than that. That is for promoting public transport. Recently, Gujarat has taken an important step. They are giving for regular buses, for every kilometer of operated, 12 rupees 50 paisa as a viability gap. For electric buses, they are giving 25 rupees as a viability gap. Even then, okay, big cities are interested in taking up this particular benefit, but the small towns, they're still not interested. And therefore, what kind of public transport should the small towns be looking at as for development? I think we need to look at a micro system, maybe a 12-seater without a conductor, without just the driver collecting fees. I think you need to look at a micro transport system, micro public transport system, rather than looking at big, large bus systems. And that also makes sense in the COVID era. I think that's a point which I'd like to say. One other point which one comes across, Kochi is an interesting city there. It has about 13 lakh people using bus system every day. There are 3 bus systems, the private and the public, both operate there. Private is the majority, there are about 1,000 buses. And then the public, very small system, which is about 200 buses there. Yeah, there are a lot of contrasts there. One important thing which I'd like to highlight, there is also a metro system now. That metro actually carries about 60,000 passengers a day. Okay. In the case of bus system, they carry 12.3 lakhs, 12.7, almost 13 lakhs, whereas the metro system, having built and spent so much money, they carry 60,000. An interesting observation is that, in fact, when they introduced last time, they actually reduced the fare by 50% as a rebate. When they reduced the fare, the ridership went up to about 75,000. And then when they brought back the fare, then ridership came down to 60,000. Then the question is, having invested so much, is our objective is to carry more passengers or collect more revenue? In fact, by reducing the fare, Kochi Metro would actually attract more passengers, maybe same or little less money, but doesn't matter. I think we need to look at the economics of a different kind. That's what is one point which I'd like to highlight here. One recent example, when the Best reduced their fare from 8 rupees to 5 rupees, capped their maximum fare, in fact, passengers went up from 17 lakh to 27 lakhs per day. That's a 10 lakh addition. I think therefore, the fare should not be seen as a full cost recovery mechanism. Fare also need to be used as a tool, as a strategy to attract more passengers. How do we do it? I think is something which each city will have to look at. Yeah. One other important observation which I'd like to make here. Kochi bus fare is 70 paisa per kilometer. Metro fare is 2 rupees 50 paisa per kilometer. We build metros and want to charge very high, but people want affordable transport. I mean, that's one point which I'd like to make. The second point is 70 paisa versus many other cities in the country. They actually charge 1 rupee 20 paisa to 1 rupee 50 paisa per kilometer. They still are under loss. Why is this difference? This culture or something else? Why is it that Kochi private transport operators are able to attract about 1,000 riders per bus per day, whereas the same city public transport systems only attract 400 to 500 passengers per day, and they run in losses, whereas the private operator actually making profits and still running well? Why is that so? Their costs are low and their revenues are also high, and that's how they make the profit. And therefore, our culture, our capacities for managing, operating, which is the right mode, public, private, or public-private partnership? I think that's the point which I'd like to highlight. The last point which I'd like to bring in here, the TOD part of it there. Many cities which are building metro systems, TOD means actually drawing a line on either side of the metro line, 2 lines, basically at 500 meters apart. Basically, that means 1 square kilometer, 1 kilometer area with metro as a central line, you actually want a TOD and increase the FSA, and that becomes a TOD. I think that's a very, very wrong notion. TOD is actually making walkable streets. High intensity development is only one part of the story, but how you convert that into a quality place, I think that is the most important part of it there. Yeah. And I would like to highlight the first slide which I showed you is what the TOD is all about, which Surat is trying to attempt. I'll just go there and show that slide, and I'll end that presentation. Yeah, this is a street there. There's a canal in the middle. The city has developed a nice walkway. It's a public park. middle of the street, and then there are streets on either side, and then they are trying to actually provide high density development on both sides. Okay, I believe without a focused development effort at the local level, without focusing on improving walkability, connectivity, TOD will not work. Ahmedabad's example of TOD seems to be working much better, because they have a 3-tier planning system. There's a development plan, there's a town planning scheme, and there is a local area plan, which is a redevelopment plan for the area which is already developed, and you carve out TOD areas, and you have a plan for a TOD for improving overall network, not just intensity of development. I think these are the possible measures. Once again, I'd like to highlight, it's important to choose right size systems. It's important to choose right institutions, right pricing, and it's important to celebrate our successes, promote our success to be replicated elsewhere if we really want to decarbonize our urban transport, and also try and keep the gains of COVID-19 in terms of the mobility to the best possible way, whatever we can identify, and continue with them. Those practices, I think, will probably give us a better world than what it is today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for highlighting the push and pull factors in travel demand management in transport sector and your very interesting presentation. I would now like to extend the invitation to Mr. Prasanna Patwardhan. He's the chairperson and managing director of the Prasanna Group. The Prasanna Group comprising of 3 subsidiaries: Prasanna Purple Mobility Solutions Private Limited, Prasanna Transport Network Private Limited, and Smilestone Motels Private Limited. Has a long history of more than 25 years in transportation. He'll be speaking on challenges and opportunities to decarbonize urban transport through the model shift from private to public transport. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Now, thank you, OP sir, and thank you, WRI, for giving me this opportunity. Your sessions always has been more of a learning than actually sharing experiences. So first, I will talk about some of the challenges. I think, am I audible?
Yes, sir. Very
Hello?
well. Yes,
Okay.
sir. You're audible.
Thank you. So first and foremost, I think it is very important that we change the way we look at the things. So it's a paradigm shift in viewing how we look at public transport. So whether we are looking at public transport again as moving vehicles or moving people. And most of the time we get confused between moving vehicle and moving people, and that is why all the development is happening around moving vehicles. Or even in public transport, development is more of an infrastructure development rather than moving people development. And that's why you see even in metro stations, people do not have proper access to reach metro stations, whereas huge money is invested in metros, but there is no opportunity for people to approach easily to metro stations. So that is the situation. So first and foremost, I would like to say that we need to change the way we look at it. And that should start from a political will, of course, but that is lagging. That is first point which I would like to say. Second is, I see that there is a disconnect between intent, which is policy. Second is execution, which is regulation. And third is action, which is implementation. So our intents are good, our policies are good, but they are not supported by regulation. In some cases, regulation is also good, but understanding about those regulations, unless in absence of any standard operating procedure, understanding is different at different levels, and people implement regulation as per their understanding of the regulation. And particularly, I would talk about Motor Vehicle Act, wherein there is lot of ambiguity in many of the sections. So you can interpret that section as you like, because that is quite age-old act. Some of the changes have been done over a period, but they are certainly not enough. Third is, when it comes to our priorities, we need to define our priorities absolutely clearly. Because when we talk about money or funding, when we build roads, we don't talk about return on investment. But when we talk about people movement, which is public transport, then we say that what is my return on investment and how much we should charge and what is the amount which I am spending. So when you talk about mobility, you should be looking at a holistic picture. How much you are spending money on road, and how much is road space being utilized by private person who is traveling singly and occupies about 150 square feet, whereas in bus, when he travels, he occupies about 2-3 square feet. Same is the case with pollution. So if you calculate pollution on the basis of per person pollution in a bus and per person pollution in a car, it will show you a different picture. And there are many things which you should talk about per person rather than per vehicle. But when it comes to taxation, unfortunately in public transport, it is calculated on per person basis, per carried person basis. So all our taxes are on per carried people basis. And we almost pay overall, including cess on diesel and everything, our total revenue goes towards taxation is around 35 to 40%. I would like to all of you to understand this number very clearly, that as far as passenger tax and road tax is concerned, we pay somewhere between 5 to 17.5% of our revenues. Our 40% expenditure goes out of our diesel or fuel. Out of that, again, now about out of 80 rupees of diesel, now 50 rupees or 55 rupees is going towards taxation. So that again 25 rupees add on to it. Then you have toll, parking charges. There are several other charges, GST on buying vehicles, GST on selling tickets. So everything is taxed. So under the circumstances, giving economical service by public transport is becoming very, very difficult. Contrary to that, when you see public transport taxation and private transport taxation, when you buy vehicles, that is the only time when you pay tax. Otherwise, you don't pay tax. Of course, cess and all this taxation on fuel, everybody pays. But I'm talking about other taxes like GST on ticket or GST on the services which we also take as input, because we don't get any input. So whatever services we take, we don't get benefit of that credit. So double taxation also happens. So taxation is a very serious issue which needs to be looked into if one wants to make public transport economical. And if you want to attract more number of people, what is important is in India, it has to be economical. As rightly pointed out by Mr. Swamy, that if you keep ticket rate in Mumbai BST from 5 to 8 rupees, there's a shortage of 10 lakh people every day. So it is that sensitive. So that one needs to understand that any public transport, what you provide, has to be economical. And to make it economical, you will have to reduce taxes. On one side, you have to reduce taxes. And on other side, to bring in parity, you will have to tax heavily for the people, those who are using their own vehicles for their commute. Today, 70 paisa per kilometer, per passenger kilometer also seems to be on higher side, because your two-wheeler is costing you lesser than that. So unless your two-wheeler starts costing you more than that, people will not come on this side. So there has to be also a push mechanism, which also Mr. Swamy has explained it quite well. Second most important thing is it has to be reliable. Mumbai local runs on only one factor, and which is reliable. Of course, it is economical also, but mostly it is reliable. And that reliability can come only through dedicated corridors. which BRTS is quite capable of giving, or even a bus lane, dedicated bus lane is capable of giving. But unfortunately, that is not being looked upon very seriously. People don't aspire for steel tires and steel bogies and everything like metro. They aspire for environment, which metro gives. And same kind of environment can be given in bus service, in BRTS also, at a much cheaper rate. So apart from economical and reliable, it has to be efficient. Like, again, I will come to, because most of the things Mr. Swami or Mrs. Janki, they have already said, but in 70 paisa, when a private operator is making money, on other side, on 2.5 rupees, you are making huge losses. So efficiency is also very, very important. So to make it very efficient, I believe that public-private partnership has to be promoted, and that would be the way forward. So efficient service will also allow you to give attractive service, reliable service, and economical service. Apart from that, integration is very, very important. Today, one of the biggest challenges is institutional integration. So unless we have integrated service, people want door-to-door service. People are not interested in only one leg by public transport and other leg by something else. They are interested in getting connected service from home to office, office to home. So that can happen, if at all, only if you have integrated services. And integration, Mr. Janki has already explained what integration means, starting from institutional integration till where information, physical integration, plan integration, etc., etc. So integration is also important. And unless we take care of all of this, people will not get attracted to public transport. You cannot force people to a service which is very pathetic. So we need to improve our service standards. At the same time, you need to make it more economical. You will have to add push and pull both the factors. Now coming to opportunities, I think this particular electric mobility has given us tremendous opportunity to change face of public transport. One thing which I forgot, I would like to say that when we say public transport, we also need to change definition of public transport. What do we mean by public transport? According to me, anything which works on sharing mode has to be treated as public transport. So one shoe cannot fit everybody. Similarly, one solution, one size of the bus, one type of service cannot be suitable to everybody. So you need to think of variety of services. For example, now these app-based services, they have come. In big cities, you need to travel at least 1 hour one side and again coming back 1 hour. So you cannot expect people to travel 1 hour more than 1 hour standing or without having any assurance of seat. So you need to provide them assured seat, then only they will get attracted to public transport. So there are a variety of services, AC services, app-based services, standard bus services. So when we talk about economy, at the same time, economy compared to what and for whom? Definition of economy is different for different people. So accordingly, we need to provide them solution. And that economical solution is possible if you give variety of service to different kind of people. So that is also one of the important factor which one needs to understand. Coming back to opportunity, I believe electric bus will make a huge difference in perception of the people about public transport. Today, whenever you see public transport, people feel that only poorest and fittest person can travel in public transport. And in most of the cases, that is the case. But in a country where about now 85% of the people do not have access to their own vehicle, they are dependent on somebody else, they will have to use public transport. And this is a great opportunity for us to ensure that public transport becomes attractive by introducing electric buses or overall electrification systems Electric BRT system can be as good as metro at much lesser price, and it will have flexibility. It will have multiple advantages. You can implement it faster. You can have not only flexibility in routes, you can have flexibility in fares also. So a lot of things can happen with this electric mobility, and we should take maximum advantage of this electric mobility. That is my first thing. And second, I will come back to public-private partnership. If one needs to make a successful public transport system, it is very important that public operator and private operator, they come together and provide a solution which is suitable to people at economical price, and where government also supports. Because of this FAME 2 subsidy, a misconception has been created in the minds of the people, particularly people those who want to hire buses, that without subsidy, electric buses will not be feasible. I disagree with this. Electric buses without subsidy also can compete with diesel buses almost at the same rate. And if you compare apple to apple, which means diesel buses which are as good as Volvo can cost you almost 20 to 30% more than electric buses. So electric buses is the future, and we should be focusing on electromobility more. So I see that the biggest opportunity today. Post-COVID, unless we focus more on public transport, situation will become chaotic. So on this forum, again, I would request government, since Janti Madam is there, it is very important that again, a focus should be brought back to public transport. And like Janenarium, some good scheme needs to be floated, considering the requirement of public transport. And that would keep public transport alive. Otherwise, we are entering into a danger zone wherein most of the STUs and private operators might go bankrupt in coming days, and that would create tremendous chaos and shortfall of public transport services. So that should not happen, and it is the right time to take advantage of even this opportunity and shift focus from private transport to public transport. I again thank all of you. We are already short of time, so thank you very much. I can see Gerald very eager to start his presentation. So thank you very much. Thank you, OP sir, and thank you, WRI. Thank you very much.
Pleasure listening to you. Pleasure listening to you, Prasanna.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for highlighting importance of paradigm shift and viewing the public transport. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Gerald Olivier. He is the lead transport specialist with the World Bank in India. His focus lies in developing solutions to enhance urban mobility, achieve sustainable economic integration through multimodal transport, enhance rural connectivity, and achieve safer transport to serve the needs of India. Thank you, sir, for a wonderful. Yes, Gerald sir, I'll just share my screen now and you'll be able to present.
Okay, great. I mean, first, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Okay,
great. And I would like to start by thanking O.P. Agarwal and the entire WRI for organizing this event. The beauty of coming after such a long list of prominent speakers is that a lot has been said, so I can keep my talk relatively short and echo and relate some of the slides that we'll share with what has been said before. I just would like to focus the presentation on two topics, non-motorized transport and buses, with a focus on e-buses, because it's easy to cover a lot on decarbonization of transport, but these are really quite essential topics. So if you can move to the next slide. And the next slide. So a couple of years ago, we worked, no, the one before. A couple of years ago, we worked with OECD ITF and Terry to try to understand what would happen under different scenarios for the larger cities of India. We took 108 cities above 500,000 people, and what we did was to test a number of policies associated with the transport infrastructure, the urban area growth, application of TOD or not, vehicle technology, the emergence of shared mobility. And through that, we calculated a number of impacts and key indicators that would show how the system of cities in India would be performing. So if you go to the next slide, we created a tool that essentially captures, the socioeconomics, the characteristic of the vehicle fleet, but also looked at the trip rates, trip distance, and other factors, because as India gets richer, as more people move to cities, the number of trips in cities is going to explode. It's going to explode, and that's going to make public transport even more essential than it was before. More affluence means more trip per capita, longer trips, and more people in city will lead to that explosion in the number of trips. And then from that, we calculated the carbon emission. Next slide, please. So what is interesting is when we look at the 2010 baseline with only 28 million tons of carbon emission, and we look at then 2050 to see what would happen in a business as usual, where the type of investment focus remains maybe more on metros, and the system gets improved but does not get improved substantially through a shift in the way Professor Swami was mentioning. Then you see an explosion actually of carbon emissions. So I'm speaking about 2050, it's a little bit further out, but it gives you a sense of the broad-based direction. Now, if more of this allocation was not only for metros, but for BRT, we would see an improvement. And for non-motorized transport, we would see an improvement. But where you really get the impact is when you combine an approach that looks at bus, mass transit, non-motorized transport, transit-oriented development together. There you see a reduction to 227 million ton by 2050 compared to the 207 in the baseline. The next leg we looked at was the impact of moving to electrification of a fleet. And here again, you get a saving of about 30 million when you combine it with the previous scenario. What is interesting is obviously we looked at well-to-tank and tank-to-wheel full consumption, so also the energy consumption that comes from the power plants, and looked at the evolution of power, because we need to look at this in total. But you can reduce 60% by 60% the emission through the right combination. Next slide. Next slide. So, what it boils down to is the kind of conceptual switch that has been mentioned earlier. Thinking about our cities differently, thinking about cities not only from a mobility perspective, but more as cities from a quality of life perspective. It's not about just a bus transport angle or a walking angle. It's creating a healthy street. It's creating a good public transport experience door to door. And that's the kind of policy we see already in place in cities like London. Now, if you go to the next slide, what I want to emphasize is that you see that the way to achieve this is not through only a transport angle. It's really through a combination of sorts that looks at the economic development strategy, the housing strategy, and then looks at how the different pillars are combined together in a total strategy. So what then emerges, moving to the next slide, is that cities are really growingly thinking about both the larger city and the quality of a neighborhood. So in the context of Singapore, you speak about the 20-minute town and the 45-minute city. And what it means is that within 20 minutes, you should have most of the amenities you need on a daily basis, so that you can walk and you create a quality environment at the neighborhood level, essentially. You still want to get the agglomeration benefits that come from having a larger city, and that's where the mass transit connect through BRT or metros the different locations together. So the combination of very effective and resilient neighborhood with that bigger city interconnected by more rapid transport solution is what gives you a vibrant city. Now, interestingly, with COVID, we see an acceleration of this mindset with cities like Paris now speaking about even the 15-minute neighborhood, where you can do all your, going to school, doing your groceries, etc. You have a quality environment within a walking distance. When you do that, you rethink totally the priority of resource allocation within the city. Next. And that then creates, next slide, yes, that then creates, a storyline to which you can connect your transport investment, from the integrated transport hub you mentioned, the cycle path, thinking about people of different needs as a transport for all, thinking about the health of people in terms of how they move and exercise, and you encourage exercise actually through even the way you integrate people in transport. So it's really stepping up one level in terms of what you want to achieve. Next. What we have seen also as a result of COVID is that cities have decided and realized that a lot of the systems that they had designed were not working particularly well in a context like this one. And they launched a lot of programs on reopening street for cycle, creating quality bike space. They developed strategies, plans, allocated funding, set up institutions, and those on the slide show you a number of cities, but the number actually has been multiplied by 10 since this slide was created. So it's become a movement as a reaction to say maybe the new normal needs to be different. Next slide. Now, what does it mean in a context like India? The slide doesn't show quite right, but anyway, on the top layer, in the short term, it's about thinking about what can be done now, right? And that's about program of temporary lane, creating space for faster buses, for faster cycle, space for pedestrian, and creating a safe transport alternative during COVID. But beyond that, it's an opportunity to think about what is my core non-motorized transport network and bus network within the city. How do you create a sustainable shift in mobility through that? So looking at the next slide, you then start thinking about a concept that was embedded in 2006 in your national urban transport policy to a reality where from small scheme, you're able to extract ideas, learnings, and then convert them into plans that are funded in the same way you would fund a plan for a metro or the like. And if you think about what you have today in India, there are very few cities that make a purposeful investment in non-motorized transport in their budget year after year within a clear long-term master plan. This is emerging. We know that the Ministry of MoHUA has been pushing for a Cycle for Change program that goes really in that direction. So this is starting, but this is really part of a story of non-motorized transport. Next, please. So now moving from what you do in a short distance in the neighborhood to what you do at the city level. I mean, at the city level, people travel longer distance, and therefore there is an opportunity to think about how do you create a system that works. Now, we know from all cities in the world that buses are central to that story. I see Prasanna is very happy to see that slide. So essentially what we know is from a mobility, efficiency, road safety, pollution, etc., buses are much more efficient than the alternative. And actually, if you go just narrowly on the topic of carbon emission, which is the topic today, if you were to address the shortfall that exists in cities, which is about 150,000 buses missing in cities today, and you were to add them, this would translate in about 6.5 million tons per annum of CO2 emission avoided, and also 8,900 tons of PM 2.5 avoided per annum, which from a quality of life and air quality is also important. So very big number that can be achieved through this kind of program. Now, moving to the next slide. It's not that buses are a newcomer in India, but they have been quite neglected. And we see a number of shifts that are required for this for a quality of bus services to improve, in line with what Professor Swami and the person I was mentioning, in the sense of creating a very clear mandate as to what you want to deliver in terms of quality of service, in terms of integrating the bus in that vision for mobility, a little bit like the example I was giving to you on London or Singapore, but which would be also applicable in the case of cities like Bogota. Thinking about not just buying buses, but thinking about delivering a service quality, and service quality associated with sustainable long-term funding, meaning that you put service on the road that are going to be sustained over time with the right funding mechanism to offset deficits, so that you keep having a quality of service. Now, to do that efficiently, you need the private sector. The private sector is what will squeeze a lot of the efficiency out of the service delivery, and that is quite an essential element that will save 15–20% of cost. Now, for the private sector engagement to work, you need to beef up the capacities of institutions that are in charge of overseeing those services to contract reliably, and to use ITS to ensure accountability that those services are being delivered and are serving the purpose intended. So I'm saying all this because ultimately, to make the shift towards decarbonization, you need a clear roadmap. And if you move to the next slide, I will just illustrate what would a roadmap for a state look like. Well, it would start by defining the vision for the state that details the level and design of bus services to be provided across, looking at how to deliver those services efficiently in-house or through outsourcing, bringing efficiencies and best-in-class practices for quality service, fixing the funding, because without fixing the funding, everything will last just until the funding expires. So fixing the funding for the long term, and doing so in ways that consider the existing and potentially new source of revenues. I think they were mentioned about a lot of tax being imposed on bus transport today, but there is also at city and state level, substantial resources for transport that could be allocated slightly differently to achieve the increase in service delivery. So within that, one can imagine a state policy and program that is put in place, that is sustainable, and that will give you the shift you were looking at. Next slide, please. And that, of course, I spoke about buses, but we know that it's not only buses, it's about the priority lane, it's about the clean buses, it's about the technology for integration, the digital ticketing, and the like. Now let's move to e-buses. Next slide. So far in the e-bus segment, there has been a small attempt, which was FAME 1, to have a few buses coming on in play in India. There is a much bigger pilot, FAME 2, which is going to bring you about 5,000 or 6,000 buses. But that remains a very, very small percentage of the 830,000 buses on the road. And if you think about the targets that are being launched, thinking about how do we get to 25% e-buses by 2030, and you think that a bus costs 1 crore, then you're looking at 2 lakh crore rupees of investment that is required. Now, this is not going to come from nowhere, right? There is going to be a need to think at scale and think about financial mechanism to move forward. So what are the economics, finance, and technical aspects related to that? So next slide, please. The economics are looking better and better. That has been touched upon by previous speaker. We can start saying that for similar e-bus or AC bus, BS6, we are getting close to the same price. Essentially, you're trading off a slightly higher or a higher initial cost against a lower cost of fuel. And therefore, we are coming close, in particular, if you add the subsidy to the equation, which is the second column. Now, we are not quite there in terms of comparing to a BS6 non-AC bus. right? And so for those STUs that are looking closely at those costs, then that's still the 68 to 87 level is still a difference that is quite substantial. Now, the thing we also see is that there is a lot of variation in the bids, and that variation comes from lack of clarity in the bidding document, lack of belief in the payment system, or a risk allocation that is maybe not that attractive in a given contract. And we see 65% variation in cost between the highest and the lowest quote received between cities. Of course, there is a very big difference between intercity and intracity, simply because the upfront cost gets distributed over many more kilometers in the case of intercity. So looking at next slide, the game changer, of course, in economics is a dropping battery cost, and that is going to bring further and further the equation on the positive side. Moving to the next slide. The challenge remains, though, the finance. The finance is challenging. We know the STUs in cities are present. They face substantial deficit pre-COVID, even more after COVID. So there is a need to think about the financing and funding through enhanced revenue solution or rebalancing of expenditures at state and city budget in ways that is going to allow a bus expansion to take place. Next slide, please. We also see internationally a number of new models that are emerging. I mean, the GCC contract you're well familiar with, but there is a lot of unbundling taking place where buses are provided by one party, the operation by another party, or separation even of the charging from the buses. So all of these models are part of the solution to achieve the 2 lakh crore investment. How do you create the right ecosystem? Next slide, please. The challenge ultimately is that when you deal with a diesel bus, you deal with 4 big components. When you deal with an electric bus, you're dealing with a lot more dimensions. And those dimensions require capacity on the private sector side, on the public sector side, but also on the banking side that may not understand all of these risk uncertainty. So coming to my final slide, what we see is, if you move to the next slide, what you see is that to really make that transition towards more e-buses take place, there is a need to think about how to address the limitation in the tendering process, improve the master concession agreement in ways that are going to unlock the access to finance. That's part of the decarbonization, because if access to finance doesn't open, you will not be able to move at scale. And it's not so easy to get access to finance. So that will then create more qualified bidders participating, more competitive bid pricing, and then you create the positive momentum you need for the transformation towards decarbonization. So in summary, whether you look at non-motorized transport or buses or e-buses, what we see today is a real opportunity to rethink the way not only the policy is articulated, but the mechanism of delivery that are going to provide you the rapid ramping up of those solutions that are obviously decarbonizing transport, but not only doing that, creating a better quality of life and creating more competitive cities. Because at the end of the day, transport is about creating competitive cities, access to opportunities, and the like. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was very insightful. Now, audience, please hang on for just for a few minutes and we'll have a couple of questions answered. Now, I would like to invite Subrata Chakrabarty to moderate the discussion. Over to you, Subrata.
Thanks, Komal. I hope you guys can hear me. Let me just start by thanking all the esteemed and distinguished panelists. I have been bugging your inbox for quite some time now, so I hope you guys can forgive me for being so persuasive. I think we have sort of overshoot, but I guess we can take a minute or two just to reflect on a couple of things. And we have all, emphasized on integration and integration of, different modes of transport and public transport, incentives and, disincentives, and meeting the requirement in the Indian context. Solutions that are fine-tuned for the Indian cities when we talk about the decarbonization of the urban transport. If I could just request each one of you, in this very limited point of time, since we have overshot, if I could request each one of you to pick one top priority action or a target for decarbonization, or it could be a starting point for decarbonization of the urban transport in India, what would it be? If I may start with Janaki ma'am. Madam, please. Madam, you are mute. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's actually difficult because there's so much to happen in the field, but I feel focusing on the public transport, whether being provided by the public authorities or the private companies, I think we should, that forms a strong foundation along with the last mile connectivity, and then we can build everything upon it. So I think that should be the priority.
Right. Thank you. May I now invite Dr. Prabjot? Dr. Prabjot, are you online? I can't.
I think she got dropped out.
Okay. So maybe we can then move to Professor Shivanand Swami. Swami sir, if you can just give one or two lines.
Yeah. I think continuing with what Madam Janki mentioned. What is more important is to develop or build capacities of the local bodies. They need to also accept, like water, drainage, sewerage, sanitation, public transport is also an essential service, and it needs to be prioritized and provided for and taken up in a big way.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. May I now invite Mr. Prasanna Patwardhan?
Yeah. So I think first is institutions are very, very important, and we should plan and invest in moving people rather than moving vehicle. So that will consider everything in integrated fashion.
Right. May I now invite Mr. Gerald?
Yes, sure. So I would say that, I mean, there is value at this point, at this critical point, to have state develop their state bus program combined with city plans for non-motorized transport. That will give you really a lot of traction moving forward.
Okay. Very interesting. So if I can sort of summarize, we must give importance to public transport along with the last mile connectivity. We can also look into how we can enhance the capacities of the urban local bodies, particularly for public transport. Very interesting comment from Mr. Patwardhan, who said very nicely that we need to move people rather than having vehicles. And last but not the least, the focus on IMT. So I guess in a way we have sort of covered each and everything that we have designed for this particular session. I would not like to take. I have tons of questions in my mind, but let me not take any further time. Let me thank all the speakers on behalf of WRI India for such a delightful discussion, and we hope to continue it forward. We'll keep you posted on what we are doing next. But for now, let me pass it on to my colleague Komal. Komal, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Subrata, for directing this conversation. And now I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone. We had some interesting conversations today. Amazing to hear different perspectives. I would like to thank all the distinguished speakers and panelists. A big thank you to all the attendees. We have hope that you have enjoyed the discussion as much as we did. You can follow us on social media channels to get in touch with us. Before we end the webinar, allow me to remind all of you that we'll be having the third webinar focused on decarbonization of the freight transport in India on the 24th September 2020. Please do keep an eye out for the same. We hope you will find time to join us on 24th September. We'll post the details soon on our social media channels. And on that note, I would like to close the webinar. Thank you so much again, all the speakers and panelists, all attendees. Stay safe and stay healthy, everyone. Take care. Have a good day ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald, Prasanna, madam. Thank you very much.
Thank
Nice
you.
seeing you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.